One of the features that Microsoft has actually built into a lot of things that they provide is support for an open REST-based query standard called OData. Okay, OData is not a Microsoft thing, but Microsoft uses OData quite a bit, and it's a very natural extension of the core concept of a REST interface, right? And the core concept of a REST interface is that you're using standard HTTP methods, you're using standard HTTP verbs and URLs, and possibly standard HTTP payloads to interact with data and to perform all CRUD, create, read, update, delete operations on that data. And this is a very universal way of interacting with information, but if you're just going with the straight URI, it can be a little bit limiting, and that's where OData can be very useful. All right, and we're actually going to look at this because for me to see OData, you kind of have to see it, and I'm going to show you this in demonstration, but I want to cover the concepts first. So let's talk about this a little bit. All right, so you have HTTP endpoints that you can use to query data. Now, I will also tell you, as you'll see in the demonstration, what's going to make this easiest is using a shared access signature as your means of authentication. Okay, and I'm not going to go at the moment into the full depth of developing that, but it's just going to make it so we can focus on the OData without having to worry about the steps that would be required for authentication using one of the primary or secondary keys. Anyways, okay, so OData is a REST protocol. Okay, it's an open standard, and it standardizes the approach to retrieving data. And like I said, it's pretty cool because Microsoft has implemented this across a number of systems, including obviously our table storage and really all of our physical storage. Okay, and it supports all of your standard, as I said, I didn't make that up, create, read, update, and delete operations. Let's take a look first at the basic concept, and then I'll show you a quick demonstration. So here are some basic concepts of how you would go about performing OData queries. So let's say that you wanted to just retrieve the basic data. Okay? To get to the core data, what you have is this is not the actual table reference. This would be your storage account, whatever that is, .table.core.windows.net. Okay, that's going to get you to the point where you can start working with the table data. So all the rest of these examples take that as the starting point. Okay, so let's say you want to retrieve data, and let's say you want to retrieve a specific entity from a table. All right, well, the way this works is, first of all, you would have to define the verb. The verb is a get, and if you're not familiar with the REST interface, anytime you put a URL into a browser and you hit go, that is a get request. Okay, and oftentimes, usually when you click a link on a page and a new page comes up, that's a get request, standard part of the HTTP standard. Okay, all right, now, the way that would work is you would go to the base URL and then it would be slash and the table name, right? So maybe your account is XYZ, so you would have https xyz.table.core.windows.net slash, and then let's say customers as a table. And then you could specify a specific customer by partition key and row key. Okay? And then that's going to return that instance very efficiently from that table. Okay? Now, you can also get data from a table by running specific OData queries. And OData has its own language. It has components similar to what you would expect in, let's say, an SQL statement. So you can filter, you can select, you can order, you can limit the number of rows that you're returning. Okay? It doesn't have a from clause like you would in a select statement because the URL essentially represents that. So how would a query against the table work? Well, it would be a get because you're returning data. You would still have the table, but this time you would not specify the partition key and row key. You would just have empty parentheses in the URL. Then, because I wrote over it, I'm going to delete that for a second. All right, then you have the query string operator. And again, if you're familiar with REST or with URLs in general, anything after the $ is considered a query string, and that's where OData lives. Okay, and then you have your OData operators, which are going to be prefixed with a $. So $ filter means you're going to assign a filter. All right, all query string operations are name value pair, so the name of the operation is filter, and then you would have a query expression. And you'll see the query expression is not that hard to figure out. Okay? And this is something we're going to go through and do a fairly straightforward, fairly simple demonstration, but this is something that can actually be pretty complex. Anyways, that's the retrieval of data. All right, now what about modification? Right? You can have inserts, updates, deletes. For example, I've got a delete. Now, the way the delete would work is that the delete is the verb. Now, in order to have a delete verb with a REST interface, usually you have to use either some kind of SDK you're working with, or let's say if this were actually in a browser, you would probably, personally, I would use something called jQuery because it makes it really easy to send requests and specify the right verb, but you'd have to do that. All right? And so you would say, okay, I'm going to delete. You'd specify the table after specifying the base URL, and you would specify the partition and row key of the record that you want to delete. Now again, this is the actual raw REST interface. You're often going to be using an SDK that's built on top of this to make it more of an object-based orientation, but you can always use this approach as well. All right. If you're going to insert, you can use, there's actually two different things. There's a put and there's a post. Technically, for inserts, you usually use a post, and for updates, you usually use a put for an update. Again, those are the verbs that's more internal. Oftentimes you will see updates done by a post simply because standard HTML, if you've got a form, the form is either going to use a get or a post. You don't have other verbs available in standard HTML markup, so that's why you see a lot of REST interfaces, even though technically it should be using a put. Often we'll use a post, for example, for data updates. Anyways, this is just a basic coverage. I'm going to show you a simple demonstration of some of this. Not going to go into all the detail on all of this, but it is something you want to be aware of, even if, as is certainly my recommendation if it's available, even if you're writing .NET apps and you're always going to use the SDK that's available in .NET, you still want to understand what's going on under the hood with the REST API.